I'm Dwyer, head of insights at Full Intel, where I do media monitoring and analysis. My background is in measurement. I've been in this field for almost 15 years, helping brands prove value and improve performance. I've developed custom metrics based off of award-winning primary research, and my goal is to take all of that research and that wealth of academia and bring it into practice in a way that we can drive and measure results. So we're going to do an introduction to trust. We'll talk about key attributes of trust. Then we'll jump into our key studies and most importantly focus on the application. What does this mean? How do you use it? Now, if you're like me, you like to start with the question, why or so what? Okay, so let's start with why trust matters. Why does it even matter? Why are we talking about trust today? Well, the purpose of public relations is to build awareness that shapes attitudes and perceptions that lead to behaviors. Well, trust, it is so strongly correlated with behavior. So if our goal is to change what people think or what people do, they need to trust us or trust our organizations, right? It's really at the basis of influencing people. And it's also the currency of relationships. Okay, this is the value driver. Research shows that trust influences customer behavior both directly and indirectly. And it builds customer loyalty over the long term. Do you have a brand that you love? Think about a brand that you love. Have you been loyal to this brand over time? Think about what it is that makes you loyal to this brand. How many of you here have an iPhone? Raise your hand if you have an iPhone. Okay, would you ever consider an Android? No, of course not, right? That would be ridiculous. Well, why is that? Well, Apple has gained your trust. They've gained your loyalty. I can't even count how many iPhones I've gone through, right? I've had some loyalty over time. Well, why is that? We're going to get into that with this study. We'll actually identify certain attributes of trust that may have led you to your brand loyalty. When I'm walking down the aisle of the Walgreens, I'm looking for adhesive bandages. Do I go for the Walgreens brand or do I go for Band-Aid? I go for Band-Aid. You might go for Walgreens. I go for Band-Aid because I'm pretty brand loyal, right? Those are the real Band-Aids anyway. So it's a similar idea. They're called Band-Aids, right? So, this idea of what is it that gains our loyalty? Subconsciously, there is something there. It might be something you're recognizing, maybe not. But there are key attributes of trust you're going to see. And these build loyalty over time. And just as they build loyalty, a breach of trust can really slash that loyalty. There was an example earlier this year that really called attention to me for Delta. Where they made some changes in their loyalty program that affected very loyal customers. These changes they made meant that you had to get more miles, travel more, spend more to get the status they used to get for a little bit less. Loyal customers were so upset that even the points guy, who was very influential in this field, he said, I quit. I am not calling Delta. I am now loyal to American Airlines. And others in the industry said, I just quit airlines altogether. So this backlash really led to a loss of trust, and loyalty as well. So this is something we need to think about when we're thinking about trust, is building and also how to prevent the loss of trust. And of course, the most coveted result of trust is the financial impact. 91% of people would likely purchase from a company that they trust. And not surprisingly, some of those people would even pay a premium for those brands. This study said 30%. I would say it's probably even more. I think that we would pay even more. But 50% of people believe that trust should be a leading priority for brands. And this should be something they're really focusing on. And in fact, they have a responsibility to build trust. Well, with these expectations, brands really can't afford to overlook the science of building trust. And 71% would unlikely purchase from a brand or a company that loses their trust. Okay? So the key attributes of the study will help build, maintain, and prevent the loss of trust. And so why this study? Trust is not new. Trust has been around for a long time, right? This is obviously not a new concept. We're not talking about AI, although we can talk about AI and trust as well. But right now we're talking about trust. Well, what makes this study unique is that it effectively overcomes two barriers. The first is this crossover from academia to practice, and the second is actionable studies. So what I find is that in academia, we have this rich research, and we have trust research. In fact, the study this is based on is from 1995, but it doesn't always cross over into the practice, right? Sometimes it does, but not as often as we'd like to see it happen. And second, when it does cross over, sometimes it lacks applicability, those actionable insights. I have a colleague in the pharma industry where she gets a trust study every year. She gets her slice of the data, of trust data, and she says, but I don't know what to do with it. I don't know how to get from point A to point B. I have a score, but I don't know what that means. So my goal is to take this academia, this research, and make it applicable, make it actionable, so you can walk away and know what to do because of this information. And lastly, why now? Right? Why now? What makes this relevant? Well, based on the Edelman Trust Barometer, it is clear that trust has declined for government and for media. So where are people putting their trust? In businesses, in NGOs, in organizations. Now is where people are putting their trust. And with this increased trust comes more expectations. Expectations to speak out. Expectations to take a stand on social issues. And expectations to advocate for their people. And in addition, there is a crisis of trust with increased distrust as a result of misinformation and disinformation. IPR just came out with a disinformation study for 2023, and it really does confirm these findings. It is something that has led to distrust. It is more difficult to earn trust than ever before and easier to lose it. So now we've talked about the why, let's jump into the study. So this study looked at 3 dimensions of trust. These come from a 1995 study from Dwyer et al., and these are the basis of what we're testing here. Integrity, this is when an organization is true to certain values or principles. It includes transparency and fairness. A lawsuit against organizations would be a breach of integrity. Ability is the most straightforward of this group. This is the skills, competencies, and characteristics that give an organization influence in a specific area. So this is how well a company does what it does. How well it makes a product or provides a service. This is the performance aspect. Benevolence is actually the most nuanced of these topics. And this is when the trustee is perceived to want to do good for the trustor. This would include all that doing good, purpose work, sustainability, inclusivity, philanthropy. It would include all of this as long as it is perceived as good from your core audience, right? This me. So let's take a deeper dive into this element to understand benevolence. So benevolence isn't just doing good, it's doing good for me from the perspective of your core audience. And it could look different based on the perceptions of your audience. This is why it's really important to understand your audience, to profile in a way that you know what their core beliefs are. So some of you may remember some of these cases from earlier this year. Target had a big backlash when they created some displays for Pride Month, and they may have thought, great, we're being inclusive, we're doing this initiative, but that's not the response they got from some of their core audience members. They got tweets about being a very woke company, they got threats to their employee safety, right? This is not maybe what they expected. So in this case, that doing good work may have been integrity, if it aligned with the company's values, but wasn't benevolence as we're defining it here. Bud Light had a similar instance as well in March. Around March Madness, they partnered with a Dylan Mulvaney, a transgender influencer, and what happened next, they probably didn't expect either. They probably thought, great, we're being inclusive. But that didn't align with their core audience, who proceeded to boycott, to dunk out beer cans, to shoot them with guns in protest. And that may have not been what they expected, but this is what happened because that's their core audience. They didn't align with this idea or with this belief. Now, I'll also tell you, they probably could have caught this in advance. They've been tracking media crisis in advance. Now, these are examples. What do these incidents have in common? These organizations didn't really understand this core audience piece of them. So core audience, it's really important to identify who is this core audience. So obviously, there's different audiences, different groups, and stakeholders in an organization, and they have different value sets, right? When it comes to social issues or causes, there are generally 2 approaches. Either you're aligned with company values independent of what the response might be. This would give you trust in the integrity category. Or you're aligning with your core audience confidence is belief, and this would build trust in the benevolence category. Now, in an ideal world, these align, right? Where you could be building it based on your values and aligned with your core audience. And what do you do when you have multiple audiences in different views and priorities? Again, it goes back to this audience profiling and really defining in that instance, who is the core audience? So, in the trust studies that we conducted, we looked to answer a few research questions. So the first thing was just to know, do these 3 attributes influence trust? Do they build trust? Do they increase trust? That's the first question. Then we want to know their influence on reputation and purchase intent. Which ones have more impact? Where should I put my efforts? And again, we want to see the impact on media coverage versus public opinion. So to do so, I partnered with Dr. Tyler Page, who is here today. We are delighted he's here. He's brilliant, so talk to him, ask me your hard questions after this presentation. And it was from the University of Connecticut. And it was fantastic to partner with him because he has a real expertise in the area of crisis. And crisis is actually so aligned with trust, right? If you build trust, you can avoid a crisis, right? It's also how you can recover from a crisis as well. So we did a series of 3 studies. These were mixed method analyses, and it was a combination of a content analysis and a survey in each of these industries. We looked at the consumer industry, the pharma healthcare industry, and the B2B industry. So the B2B we just finished, so it's kind of fresh off the press. It's our first time sharing it. And we looked at a few prominent companies that were very visible in the media and well known to be able to test these different aspects of trust. In terms of key findings, all 3 factors increase trust in all 3 industries. So we could check off that box. They all lead to more trust. But we learned that the factor with the greatest influence depends. It depends on both the industry and on the main goal. Okay? Whether that is reputation building or sales, and we'll get into that. Benevolence and ability are the 2 factors that are really helpful to build reputation, and integrity is what protects your reputation. Essentially, a breach of integrity could very quickly dissipate brand trust. And lastly, ability was the factor in the news analysis that had the highest relationship with sentiment. So that it was the highest predictor of sentiment. So which industry of those 3 do you think is most impacted by trust? Okay, raise your hand if you think it is pharma. Raise your hand if you think it's consumer. Raise your hand if you think it's B2B. There's like 1 hand over there. Okay, not a lot of people in your camp there. Okay, if you said pharma, you are correct. I saw a big hand up over here. He knew. So in the pharma industry, it was the one that was most influenced by the trust factors. Again, they were all influenced, but this was really strong in both the reputation side and in the purchase intent side, or the action side. So and then the consumer sector was the one that had the greatest influence on the reputation piece, the trust factors. And in the B2B, it was more on the sales side. So this will probably make sense as we go through it. So we're going to focus first on the pharma. So in the pharma healthcare industry, benevolence had the greatest impact on reputation. How likely people would recommend a brand or speak positively about a brand has to do with benevolence. However, when it came to action, use intent, in this case we're calling it purchase, but it was use intent for pharma, ability was the strongest factor. So think about it. So if a doctor recommended a product, people would be more likely to use it if they felt like they were strong in the ability factor. And I have a quote here from Lee Kelly from BU. She has a lot of experience in the pharma sector, and she says, when it comes down to it, I will go with whatever is most effective. Right? I don't have to believe in the company. I don't have to think they're a great company. If that product works, I'm going to use it. I can really relate to that. I think that if I had an illness and there was a medicine and I knew it would treat it 100%, I don't care if the devil needs it. I'm going to take that medicine. Right? That ability factor is really important. We saw this during COVID. During COVID, people started asking questions. They wanted to know about these manufacturers' vaccines they never heard about before. And then you picked your vaccine. Did anyone do this? Like, do I want the Pfizer or the Moderna? Well, I don't know. Let me do a little research and see. Then you do your research, and you learn to pick whoever did the most research studies. Whoever you thought had the highest ability factor. I did that at least. I'm not going to tell you. I did that. So, that's one of the things that happened, that we really care about ability when it comes to pharma. Okay? Now, interesting as well is that when it comes to benevolence, kind of this good for me piece, if you want to build reputation as a pharma brand, then you want to lean into this benevolence piece. Well, one of the things that we learned here is, and you might even see this with pharma companies that work with certain initiatives, that they might be things that affect more people. Because remember, it has to be something that the audience relates to. So if it's a very, very rare disease that no one's heard of, it might be harder to create that connection. For me to think, oh, that company's doing something good for me. But if you think of an illness that affects lots of people, think of breast cancer. So many people are affected by breast cancer. I'm sure everyone in this room knows someone who has been impacted by this. I think of my sister-in-law who was just converted, and I'm so proud. But it is something that is personal to me now. So when I hear of a company investing in that, I care. I feel like they care about me. My trust level increases. So let's go on to consumer. Interestingly, the finding is the exact opposite for consumers. So if you want to build ability, if you want to build reputation, ability is the key factor. If you want to lead to purchase, if that's what you're concerned about, then benevolence is the key factor. So this is interesting, but it also makes sense to me, right? Obviously, all these factors are important, but if I want someone to buy something, then it's really aligning with their values and then feeling like I'm doing good for them. You know, I would put Starbucks over Dunkin' Donuts any day of the week, and I don't even drink coffee, right? I just have this brand loyalty. And if I look at my subconscious layers of why I'm loyal to this brand, it probably comes down to this benevolence factor. I like the brand. I like what they're doing. I like their ideals. I feel like it's good for me. I think they care about the environment, whatever it might be. There's something about this brand that I relate to. For you, it might be something else. Maybe it's Patagonia or Coach, that you have some brand that you're very loyal to, and you feel like they care about you. Maybe when you're taking a flight, and maybe you flew here, you pick Delta instead of American because you think they care more about you, right? So this is the benevolence factor. In the consumer, there's lots of product choices, and because of that, the benevolence piece becomes even more important when it comes to purchase. Some brands are surprised. I say, oh, you want people to buy your product? Yeah, don't talk about your product. Right? Talk about your benevolence. Talk about whatever it is that's going to make someone connect to your product, not the ability of the product itself, which is really interesting from this trust research. And obviously, action and communication of message should align with the priority trust attribute for the dominant goal for maximum trust increase. So obviously, they're all important. But when you think about your goal and you think about your industry, lean into that to increase trust. And third is B2B. So B2B is similar to consumer in the sense that ability is the factor that leads on reputation. In fact, it was the only factor that had a statistically significant effect on reputation for B2B brands. Benevolence was the strongest factor of purchase, but again, they're all quite strong. Ability closely follows, and then integrity. So it's similar in some ways, but if you remember at the beginning, B2B actually leans more into this sales space where trust is building, and it kind of makes sense. Maybe when it comes to B2B, it's less about this reputation and it's more about, does it do what I need? I just buy the product. So there's kind of more of an emphasis of trust on sales than on actual reputation. Well, let's dive into a few just quick examples so that we make sure we understand this, and then we can move on to the application. So let's say I'm Pfizer. I would pick my industry, pharma, and then I would decide what is my main goal. So let's say in this case, you just want people to use the product. You just want uptake. Think of, COVID vaccines. I'm going to pick sales. So which factor, which attribute of trust would I emphasize? Shout it out. Ability, yes. Excellent. Okay, now I'm Coca-Cola. Great reputation. I'm launching a new product. I'm going to say I'm also concerned about sales at this point. That's going to be my focus. Now, you might say to me, Angela, well, both of these are my goals. I want to build reputation and increase sales. Yes, I know. But in every moment of time, you might be leaning in a specific direction, and knowing what that is will help you communicate more effectively for that goal. Because obviously these are all important, and that's why we're defining it, and it will shift depending on what you're working on, what your focus is. So Coca-Cola, consumer, I would say sales again, and I'm launching the product, I want to increase sales. What would be the factor I would lean into? Which attribute of trust? I heard it. Benevolence. Excellent. So now I'm B2B. I'm Boeing. Okay? And again, just for purposes of our exercise, I'm going to pick sales again. I'm choosing this to show how even in different industries with the same goal, your action will be different. Someone said it. Benevolence, and I kind of highlighted ability because it was a close second. Okay, in terms of sales. So that's where you would focus if you were rowing and that was really your goal. So how can you apply these findings to data? There are 3 key applications that I've identified that maybe you've thought of others that we've discussed today. So 1, you can help your organization make business decisions that align with the trust factors that we've talked about today. 2, you can create content that is more likely to build trust by aligning with the key attributes of trust that are most likely to lead to the result you're looking for, whether that's reputation or purchase. And remember that ability across the board has the greatest relationship to sentiment. So if you're pitching news, for example, or writing any type of content, while you might be focusing on benevolence because that's your key topic, if you incorporate ability, it will actually increase the chance of positive sentiment. So you want to actually loop them together in content. Essentially always with ability in some way. That could be through a credible voice, which is how I would recommend it. And third, which is my favorite, is after you've developed the strategy and communicated the messages, you can measure that content to actually predict the likelihood that it would lead to trust. Well, since I focus on media measurement and help brands show how they're moving the needle with content, I'm particularly interested in the measurement piece. So I'm going to show you what I did with the trust data. So I used the trust data to develop a trust metric. So using this exact data, the study that I shared, we used it to develop a trust metric, and we combined that with the media impact score that shows how likely the coverage will influence your readers. Now I can show how likely my coverage is to build trust with my readers. So it can actually be predictive. Now, of course, these are just proxies or measures of likelihood, but they can be an effective tracking method in between surveys or other outcome-focused measures. And again, even when you do your surveys and you do look at your sales, you still need to somehow show that those outcome metrics are linked to your communications work. And a metric like a trust metric can provide this link. And one more thing in terms of measurement and evaluation, whenever we're looking at this, there are 3 important elements that I wanted to mention, which is context, consistency, and applicability. So if you are going to be taking a deeper dive and measuring trust, or anything for that matter, let's focus on these. Remember, a number is just a number until it has context. So compare over time, compare with other brands in the industry, make sure there's always some type of comparison. Consistency. Once you've developed your methodology and your approach, then be consistent over time so that you can compare. So if you want to take some of these findings for your industry and say, okay, I'm going to focus on this, and this is how I'm going to weight things this way, just be consistent over time. And applicability. Like I said, focus on that action item, the insights. In this case, you might say, I can act on that. I know exactly what factor I should focus on, so I'm going to focus on this business initiative. I'm going to write this content. I'm going to measure my content so that benevolence has a stronger weight, because that's more important for me. And when it comes to applying the 3 dimensions of trust, to build trust and measure trust, authenticity is key. This means that any communication message needs to absolutely be backed by action. And we can lead with this because for this whole presentation, authenticity is key. What your audience expects brands to show up in a way that they can be trusted. And they're also very astute to how brands show up and can easily differentiate between those who are authentic in word and action. So make sure as you integrate these attributes of trust and these 3 dimensions, that you do so with authenticity at the forefront. We're going to move to Q&A. I think we have about 10 minutes or so.